The California Code of Regulations consists of all the rules and regulations that govern any California state agency that was created to enact, administer, and support the laws passed by the state legislature. So what does that mean? So basically, the state legislature sets the laws, and then some laws may require a state agency in order to enact those laws. So the state legislature will also create state agencies, and they tell them, look, you're responsible for these laws. So the California Code of Regulations works out all the details of how to enact laws that have been passed, and it sets the procedures for state agencies to operate. There are approximately 200 state regulatory agencies that are in charge of some aspect of the state laws, and they all have to follow the rules and the regulations that are set out in the California Code of Regulations for that agency. Now, the rules and regulations in the Code of Regulations are grouped into 28 broad categories or titles. Each title is further divided into divisions, and each division is divided into chapters. It's basically a way of organizing all the different regulations that are in place for the state of California. So the rules and regulations that primarily affect drug and alcohol counselors can be found in Title IX, which is Rehabilitative and Developmental Services, Division 4, Department of Alcohol and Drug Programs, Chapter 8, Certification of Alcohol and Drug Counselors. Now, there are other sections that pertain to substance use treatment programs themselves, but the regulations that primarily affect drug counselors are in Title IX, Division 4, Chapter 8. So as we talked about earlier, by state law, alcohol and drug counselors are regulated by the California Department of Healthcare Services. They're the agency that oversees, administers, and enforces all the laws that pertain to substance use treatment. And so Title IX in the California Code of Regulations establishes the rules and the regulations that the Department of Healthcare Services has to follow. Now, all the California Code of Regulations can be accessed and searched. I've provided a website for you here, https://govt.com/calregs, CALREGS/3. Now, that's one of those websites that often may change over time. But if you go to westlaw.com, who is the agency that collects all these things, not only for California, but for other states, you simply need to find the California Code of Regulations, which you can equally probably get simply by searching, doing an internet search for California Code of Regulations. In any event, all trainee, registered, or certified alcohol and drug counselors who work in California are strongly encouraged to download and carefully read the California Code of Regulation codes that pertain to alcohol and drug counseling, as these are the codes that will directly apply to the day-to-day work of counseling clients in a substance use treatment program. Now, like I did with the laws, I am going to provide a selected sample of California regulation codes that affect drug and alcohol counselors. As with the state laws, there are many California regulation codes that either directly or indirectly affect alcohol and drug counselors. It is always important to consult with supervisors and experts if you're unsure if a regulation applies to a particular situation. So in the following slides, again, is a selected sample of some of the important regulations that impact drug and alcohol counselors working in California. But again, like I did with the laws earlier in this presentation, the regulations that I mentioned in this presentation are neither exhaustive or all-inclusive. It is a sample. And you should download the California Code of Regulations and or speak with your supervisors, attorneys, certifying organizations, and ethics boards whenever you have regulation questions or concerns. All right. So let's look first at Title IX, 13000. This is the first code of regulations that's listed in Chapter 8. And it states simply that the regulations contained in this chapter shall apply to all individuals providing counseling services in an alcohol or other drug program. That basically just means what it says. Everybody who provides alcohol and drug counseling services are subject to the California regulation codes that are in Chapter 8. So Title 9, 13005 further clarifies that counseling services means or includes any screenings done prior to admission, meaning that if somebody calls a treatment program to ask about services, that's considered counseling services. Any intakes, assessments, treatment planning, counseling, which includes individual counseling, group counseling, family counseling, couples counseling, counseling with other individuals significant in the life of our clients, somebody that might not be in their family, but is their boyfriend or girlfriend or best friend or sponsor. Those all fall under counseling. And of course, documentation. So counseling services encapsulates all of that. This is basically everything that you do as a drug and alcohol counselor. So everything you do as a drug and alcohol counselor are going to be subject to the regulations that are in Chapter 8 of the California Code of Regulations. So going back to the Health and Safety Code 11833, as mentioned previously, that state law requires that any individual providing counseling services in a substance use treatment program must be registered with or certified by a certifying organization that's approved by the California Department of Healthcare Services. I'll explain registration and certification in just a minute. Or you have to be licensed as a medical or a mental health professional, which I will mention later in this presentation. So basically what this state law said is, if you're providing any kind of counseling services, either you need to be a licensed mental health clinician, or you need to be a licensed medical professional, such as a psychiatrist or a registered nurse, or a number of other medical licenses that are out there, or you must be registered with or certified by a certifying organization as an alcohol and drug counselor. Now, let's do a quick note about terms, because this is going to be talked about repeatedly in the upcoming slides. So step one for a drug and alcohol counselor in the process of becoming certified is to register. So a registered alcohol and drug counselor is someone who has registered with one of the credentialing organizations as an intern or pre-certified counselor. So if you are an intern counselor, that means that you are not certified yet. So a registered counselor is somebody who registered with one of the credentialing agencies as an intern with the intent to obtain certification as an alcohol and drug counselor, meaning that when you register, you need to be enrolled in a program or in the process of attaining certification. And part of registration also requires that you are actively working on completing the certification requirements. So you can't register to become a drug and alcohol counselor and then not do anything, not collect any hours, not do any of your education. You have to be actively working on getting certified in order to remain registered as an alcohol and drug counselor. Step two then is a certified alcohol and drug counselor. So once you've completed all the requirements to become certified, including passing the state final exam, then you're no longer a registered alcohol and drug counselor. You have become a certified alcohol and drug counselor. I will explain many of the, all of the criteria that entails becoming a registered and then subsequently certified drug and alcohol counselor in this presentation. All right, so going back to Health and Safety Code 11833, Title 9, 13035, Section F in the California Code of Regulations essentially mirrors this. It's basically the same language. So Section 13035 states that all non-licensed or non-certified, meaning you are not a licensed mental health clinician or a medical professional or a certified drug and alcohol counselor. So all non-licensed or non-certified individuals who are providing counseling services in an alcohol and drug program shall be registered to obtain certification as an alcohol and drug counselor by one of the certifying organizations specified in this regulation. So to explain that, it is basically a repeat of what was said earlier. If you're providing counseling services, you either have to be a licensed clinician, or you have to be a certified alcohol and drug counselor, or you have to be registered as an intern alcohol and drug counselor with the intent to attain certification. Now, the bottom line is that everybody who's providing drug and alcohol counseling has to be certified or registered with one of the certifying organizations. As mentioned earlier in this presentation, there are 3 certifying organizations that are currently approved by the California Department of Healthcare Services to administer alcohol and drug counselor registration and certification. What's meant by administering registration and certification is that they are the ones who take the applications, check all the boxes, take your registration and certification check, make sure to verify that you're doing everything you're supposed to do, administer the exam, and then tell the state that you are registered or certified. So the state's not doing those administrative tasks. What they've done is they've approved certifying organizations to do all those administrative tasks. So again, as mentioned earlier, the 3 that are currently approved by the Department of Healthcare Services. The first one is the Addiction Counselor Certification Board of California, or the ACCBC, previously known as CADE, the California Association of Alcohol and Drug Educators. CADE still exists as an organization, but they do a lot of regulatory functions for training programs, such as the San Diego City College Alcohol and Other Drug Studies program. So CADE also administers the Addiction Counselor Certification Board of California. So the ACCBC is one of the organizations who will register and certify drug and alcohol counselors. The second organization is the California Association of DUI Treatment Programs. That was their original name. They are sometimes referred to as the California the California Drug Treatment Programs. But their official name is the California Association of DUI Treatment Programs, or CADTP, C-A-D-T-P. And the last one is the California Consortium of Addiction Programs and Professionals, also known as CCAP, C-C-A-P-P. CADAC is a credentialing organization that was in existence for a very long time in California, and sometimes people refer to becoming a certified drug and alcohol counselor as getting your CADAC, but CADAC doesn't exist anymore. CADAC and another organization called CAR were merged into one organization, and they renamed themselves as CCAP. So CCAP is CADAC. So the ACCBC, the CADTP or CADAP, or CCAPP, CCAP are the 3 credentialing organizations. You can register or certify with any one of those 3. Now, California Code of Regulations, Title 9, 13035, Section C2, further clarifies that any certifying organization approved to register or certify alcohol and drug counselors must be accredited with the National Commission for Certifying Agencies, or the NCAAA, or they won't be approved by the California Department of Healthcare Services. This is what happens when you start talking about all these different regulatory agencies. There are lots of acronyms, but basically just know that all 3 certifying organizations are currently accredited with the NCAA, and they are currently the only organizations that can register or certify alcohol and drug counselors in the state of California. All right. Although each of the 3 certifying organizations are recognized as valid by the Department of Healthcare Services, they each have slightly different requirements, which I'm going to talk more about later in this presentation. And they each have different fee structures, because of course you are going to be charged a fee both to register and certify as a drug and alcohol counselor. Somebody's got to pay for all those administrative tasks that these organizations are doing. The requirements tend to change year by year. So instead of listing those in this presentation, I'm simply recommending that people go to the websites for the most current details regarding requirements to register and certify. So the CADE, CADEP, and CCAP websites are listed below on this slide. Now, it's worth noting that in the Code of Regulations, Title 9, 13010, Section B, This allows individual substance use treatment programs themselves to determine which of the Healthcare Services Department approved certifying organizations, as specified in section 13035, it will recognize when hiring alcohol and drug counselors certified by or registered with those organizations. Boy, that sounds like a legal speak right there. Basically what it means is that while the state recognizes any registrations or certifications from any of the 3 certifying organizations, the state will allow an individual treatment program to decide to only hire people who are registered or certified with CADAP, for example. However, I am not aware of any program in San Diego County that does not recognize all 3 of the certifying organizations. So if you're in San Diego County and you're registering and certifying, essentially it doesn't matter who you register or certify with. In the Alcohol and Other Drug Studies program at San Diego City College, we simply recommend that trainee intern clinicians, if told to certify or register with a particular organization, to simply ask why they need to be certified or registered with that particular organization. But again, every single person that I know who's an alcohol and drug counselor in San Diego County has been able to choose whatever certifying organization they want, and all the treatment programs accept all of the certifications. All right, Title 9, 13035, Section F1 states that counselors who register with certifying organizations can provide counseling services, so long as the registered counselors complete certification as an alcohol and drug counselor within 5 years of the date of registration. What this basically means is that when you register, it starts a clock. And now you've got to finish everything that you have to finish in order to get certified within 5 years. So you got to finish all your education, you got to finish your internship practicum, you've got to finish your supervised hours, you've got to pass the final state exam within 5 years of the registration. We typically recommend that people do not register with any of the credentialing organizations until they are actively looking for work as a drug and alcohol counselor. You do not need to register if you are working in a drug treatment program, say as a residential staff member. That's not a requirement. Or you are working in a drug and alcohol program in some administrative capacity. You're like a administrative services manager or program manager or something like that. That's not required. The only people who need to be registered or certified are those providing counseling services. And once you register, you've got 5 years to finish your certification process, which is easily done in that time, even if you are doing part-time education. Now, in this code, it also does allow for an extension of up to 2 years maximum additional time to complete certification. So you got 5 years to do it, but you can get an extension of up to 2 years, quote, due to medical problem or other hardship consistent with the policy developed by the certifying organization. So what you would do, say, if you registered with CADAP, is you get close to the 5 years, you haven't taken the exam yet, and you need an extension. You apply with the organization that you registered with in order to get that extension due to some hardship. And then the credentialing organization can decide to either give you that extension or not give you that extension. All right, Title 9 of the Code of Regulations 13040 is very important. This particular set of regulations sets the state's minimum requirements for a person to gain certification as an alcohol and drug counselor. Now, very important, the state will allow any of the certifying organizations to increase minimum state standards to become certified, but they cannot decrease the minimum standards. Now, I'll talk about some specifics here in just a minute, but basically what they're saying is the Department of Healthcare Services sets the minimum requirements that people need to achieve in order to become certified. But your particular credentialing organization that you have registered with may increase those requirements. By law, they're allowed to do that, but they cannot decrease the minimum standards set by the state. So the first standard is that a student trainee must complete a minimum of 155 hours of formal classroom education in alcohol and drug counseling that includes the subjects covered in the 8 practice dimensions. Now, brief comment about the 8 practice dimensions. The 8 practice dimensions were set by SAMHSA, the United States Federal Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. The 8 practice dimensions were established as criteria to demonstrate minimum competency in order to become a certified alcohol and drug counselor. This was published in TAP 21, which is a free publication. You can easily find it online. First published by the Center for Substance Use Treatment. So TAP 21 established the 8 practice dimensions. So the federal government set those, and then California adopted those 8 practice dimensions and said that any training program that's providing education for drug and alcohol counselors needs to provide at least 155 hours of education in the 8 practice dimensions. So the 8 practice dimensions consist of assessment, treatment planning, referral, service coordination, counseling, client, family, and community education, documentation, and then the catch-all category of other professional and ethical responsibilities. Now, there are students who get confused, well, what about the 12 core functions? So the 12 core functions is basically the 8 practice dimensions, but KDAC, now CADAP, broke those 8 practice dimensions themselves, split a couple of them in 2, and created the 12 core functions. The 12 core functions is essentially the exact same thing as the 8 practice dimensions. Again, they just split a couple of those practice dimensions and call them a core function instead of a practice dimension, which credentialing organizations have the right to do. As long as they don't mess with the minimums set by the state, you can essentially call it whatever you want. Now, note that while the state sets a minimum of 155 hours of formal classroom education, all 3 of the certifying organizations currently require a minimum of 315 hours of alcohol and drug education. So again, state sets the minimum, but the credentialing organizations can increase those minimums if they like. They simply cannot decrease them. Now, for students who are in the San Diego City College Alcohol and Other Drug Studies program, those students get way more than the 315 hours. People who graduate the AODS program at City College will receive 528 hours of classroom education, and that doesn't include the 45 hours of supervision that they get during the internship and work experience course. So AODS graduates at City College more than meet both the state and the certifying organization minimums. All right, the second criteria to become certified, as part of the training curriculum, the student trainee must complete a minimum of 160 hours of supervised alcohol and drug counseling training on site. This is often referred to as a practicum or an internship. So you are required, in addition to classroom education, you have to do a minimum of 160 hours of a practicum or an internship, working at a substance use treatment program or a behavioral health treatment program that includes substance use treatment. Now, note that CCAP has increased this minimum to 255 hours of supervised practicum, internship, or work experience. So one thing that you are allowed to do in California is get a job working as a drug and alcohol counselor registered while completing your education. Then once you've completed all of your education hours and you are about to begin to do your minimum of 160 hours of internship, you can apply to use your job as the place of your internship, which would make sense. Many internships you're not getting paid. If you already have a job in which you're getting paid and that job is drug and alcohol counseling, then you can petition to use your job as the minimum requirement for the practicum or internship. Students at San Diego City College in the AODS program are required to do a minimum of 255 hours of internship. This way, the students meet the maximum criteria set by both CCAP and the lower criteria set by the other two credentialing organizations of 160 hours. The third criteria to become certified is to complete a minimum of 2,080 documented hours of paid or unpaid work experience, providing counseling services in a substance use treatment program. 2,080 hours is 1 year of full-time work. So 40 hours a week times 52 weeks in a year is 2,080 hours. So the state says that you must do the equivalent of 1 year of full-time work working as a drug and alcohol counselor while supervised in a substance use treatment program before you can become certified. Now, that can be paid work or that could be unpaid work. So somebody could do volunteer work as long as it is actual counseling experience in the 8 practice dimensions. Now, the 2,080 hours can be done prior to completing your education, during your education, or after you've completed your education, as long as those 2,080 hours happen while you are registered with a certifying organization. Note that CCAP requires 3,000 hours of paid or unpaid work experience. So again, CCAP has increased the standards, the minimum standards set by the state. And then the fourth criteria is to obtain a score of at least 70% on the comprehensive and final alcohol and drug counselor certification exam. This is the exam that you take after you've completed all of your education. Now, note that both CCAP and CADAP use the International Consortium or International Certification and Reciprocity Consortium, typically referred to as the ICRC exam, whereas the ACCBC publishes their own exam. Both of those exams are approved by the state. Really, honestly, what that simply means is that CCAP and CADAP have said, hey, we're not going to bother coming up with test questions and monitoring this. We're going to purchase the rights to use the ICRC exam, whereas the ACCBC is spending time developing and correcting and updating their own exam. Doesn't matter which exam you take, both are approved. And then the last thing that you need to do in order to become certified is sign an agreement to abide by the certifying organization's Alcohol and Drug Counselor Code of Conduct. Now, in part 3, I'm going to go into much greater detail about the Alcohol and Drug Counselor Code of Conduct, which are sometimes referred to as the ethical codes, both the state's minimums and then the certifying organization's additional requirements. All right, Title IX, Section 13045, essentially duplicates the Health and Safety Code Law 11833 and states that prior to certifying an alcohol and drug counselor, the certifying organization must contact all the other certifying organizations to determine if the applicant's certification has ever been revoked. So again, as was discussed earlier, if you lose your certification with CCAP, for example, and you try to apply with CADAP, hoping that they won't notice, by both state law and state regulations, CADAP is required to reach out to the other 2 credentialing organizations to make sure that your certification has never been revoked. Title IX 13050 is the section regarding certification renewal. So alcohol and drug counselor certification is valid for 2 years. Then it must be renewed. So after you've finished all of your education and your internship and the 1 year of full-time experience and you pass the state exam and you sign the code of ethics, you get certified for 2 years. And at the end of those 2 years, then you have to pay an additional fee to remain certified. Now, you don't have to go back and redo all the education, internship, and the like. The state regulation says that prior to renewing a certification, the counselor must complete a minimum of 40 hours of continuing education, or CEUs. So continuing education units or continuing education hours that are used for certification as an alcohol and drug counselor must relate to alcohol and drug counseling. And so those continuing education hours are also subject to approval by the certifying agency with which the counselor is registered or certified. So like if you, let's see, if you take a CPR class and you, at the end of that class, they tell you, you got 4 hours of continuing education units. And you're like, yay, I got 4 hours. Your credentialing organization may not accept that. In fact, I think they typically would not accept that. So if you're registered with CCAP and you go to CCAP and you say, hey, out of my 40 hours, 4 of those hours were CPR or first aid, they're probably going to tell you that doesn't meet the requirements. You need to go do another 4 hours in something relating to drug and alcohol counseling. So all the credentialing organizations typically provide much more detailed guidance on how to get continuing education units. CEUs can be done both in person or online. It is an important thing, though, that certified alcohol and drug counselors need to keep in mind. 40 hours is a full week's worth of work. So you have 2 years to get 40 hours of continuing educations. Probably not something that you want to wait until the day before your certification is up. And then it's a requirement each 2-year period. So you do 40 hours of CEUs and you're allowed to recertify. And then another 2 years go by and you have to finish another 40 CEUs in order to recertify again. Okay, Title IX, sections 13065 and 13070. There's a lot of details in these regulations. Essentially, both these sections are procedural statements and regulations regarding investigations of alleged counselor misconduct, including the counselor's right to review or appeal any sanctions. So if you are reported by somebody to the state as doing something inappropriate as a certified or registered alcohol and drug counselor, there are all sorts of procedures regarding how you're investigated. And then if you want to appeal the sanctions, there's regulations regarding how to appeal those sanctions. Section 13010 Part C makes it clear that certification as a drug and alcohol counselor, quote, does not confer on any individual any right or privilege to provide AOD treatment services outside of an AOD program or to practice any other profession for which licensure is required. What this means is that being a certified drug and alcohol counselor does not give you the legal right to open up a private practice and call yourself a certified drug and alcohol counselor. Here's my office, I'm providing counseling services. Nor does it allow you to do other types of counseling services that typically requires a license, like marriage counseling. You're not allowed to get certified and then open up a private practice as a marriage counselor. So the state's very clear on this. What it does do is it gives you the rights and privileges to practice alcohol and other drug counseling inside of an alcohol and drug counseling treatment program. All right, and then section 13015 Part B clarifies that licensed professionals. So a licensed professional is a physician or medical doctor, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a marriage and family therapist, a licensed clinical social worker, a registered nurse. I mean, any one of those people, all of whom work at drug and alcohol treatment programs. If they already have a license, then they are not required to become certified as alcohol and drug counselors. So their license needs to be in good standing, meaning that it's valid and it's not revoked, suspended, or otherwise terminated. So if a licensed marriage and family therapist is working in a drug and alcohol treatment program and their license becomes suspended for some reason, then they cannot provide counseling services in an AOD treatment program unless they get certified or register as a drug and alcohol counselor, or they get their license back in good standing. All right, so in part 3, we're now going to move into the codes of conduct. So the codes of conduct are established by the state in the California Code of Regulations as the things that counselors can and cannot do, and each of the credentialing organizations also have their own say on what the ethical codes are for drug and alcohol counselors.